Welcome back to Grim and Whim. Today we will be looking into a bizarre missing persons case, and the haunting details of this case continues to trouble investigators to this day. 5-year-old Anna Christian Waters vanished from her own backyard in San Mateo County, California in 1973. What's crazy is that her parents were actually inside the home while she went missing, and her strange abduction has continued to stump everyone from investigators to the family members who are still alive and the community, because there was a pretty large community effort when Anna went missing. And it's obvious to basically everyone who comes across this case that Anna was abducted and she didn't just wander off. And so everyone's still asking what exactly happened that day. Before getting into the timeline of her case, let's look into what we know about Anna and her life before she vanished. Anna Christian Waters was born on September 25th, 1967, to her parents George Waters and Michael Benedict. According to the Charlie Project and a few other sources, her name is pronounced Anna, like the character in Frozen. So not Anna, but Anna. And Anna was an adorable little girl with curly blonde hair, brown eyes, and little dimples on her cheeks when she smiled. Anna is Caucasian, and when she disappeared, she was about 3'8" and 40 pounds, so a typical 5-year-old. And she was very much a typical 5-year-old, very fun-loving. She was described as being, very high-spirited and just, a fun-loving kid. And at the time of her disappearance, Anna was a kindergarten student at Alvin Hatch Elementary School, and her mother was actually a teacher's aide at the school. At the time of her disappearance, Anna was living with her mother, Michael, and her stepfather named Joe Ford. And she also had 2 half-brothers who were older than her, and these were her mother's children before she had Anna. And I couldn't find the name of both of the half-brothers, but one of the siblings was named Nanda, and he does play a role later in the investigation, but I couldn't find the other sibling's name, and so I don't know if it was to protect the identities of these siblings because they were just children at the time of Anna's disappearance. Anna's parents got a divorce, but I wasn't able to find exactly when that happened, but it has been reported that it was pretty soon after Anna's birth. Her mother has still been fiercely advocating for her missing daughter and searching for answers, as well as many of the other members of her family. However, her biological father, George Waters, was another story entirely, and we will get more into what his deal is later on in the investigation because it's there's a lot going on. And so we'll get into that later. But first, a quick history on Anna's biological parents. So George Waters, Anna's biological father, worked as a physician in San Francisco around the time of Anna's birth. But he was originally born in the Philippines to medical missionary parents. He and his family spent quite a bit of time in a Japanese concentration camp until it was liberated by the U.S. Marines when World War II ended. He graduated from Princeton and then accepted a teaching post at the American Farm School in Thessaloniki, Greece. And I have no idea if I am pronouncing that right, but he accepted this teaching post when he was only 22. And so he was a pretty studious guy, very intelligent. And while in Greece, that is when he met Michael Benedict, Anna's mother. And I've looked at a couple different pronunciations of her name because it's not spelled like the typical name Michael. Um, I've heard it pronounced Mikael, but then in other interviews, it was pronounced Michael. And so I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. I'm going to continue to say Michael, but just know that I could be completely butchering her name. Michael Benedict was married with two young children when they met, and it's unclear how their relationship developed, but George and Michael would later marry in New York in 1964 while George was attending Columbia Medical School. 3 years later, Anna Christian Waters became George's one and only child, and Michael's third child, but first daughter. We will get into what caused the two to divorce later on, and the creepy details surrounding Anna's father and another person that I don't want to introduce now because it would be kind of a lot of names. And now that we have just a bit more backstory of the family, we can actually get into the timeline of the case. It was a typical Tuesday on January 16th, 1973. Anna had gone to kindergarten that day at Alvin Hatch Elementary School, and the school bus dropped her off in front of her house at around 1 p.m. Nothing was amiss in the home. Soup was cooking on the stove, and her mother and stepfather and two friends who were actually visiting from out of town, they were all just, catching up in the living room. And it had been raining that day, so Anna changed into some play clothes to go outside and play. And she changed into not only these, play clothes, but also rubber rain boots, and they were oversized, and so didn't quite fit her, but was good enough for running around and playing in puddles. And this is such a typical thing, and I love the fact that Anna seems like the type of kid who just loved being outside. And I mean, it was the 70s, and so that does make sense. Most children probably spent quite a bit of time outside. I know in the 90s, that was something I did. I would get off the bus, I would walk home, and I would play outside until it was time for dinner. But sort of just to kind of describe where Anna lived, the property that they had, they lived in a very rural area, and the property was fairly large. It had a creek that ran, near it, and then there was also a barn house, and lots of room for a kid to run around and explore. And so it was very typical for Anna to play outside after school. But at 2:20 p.m., her mother became uneasy because she hadn't heard really much sound from the backyard in quite a while. And as you might know, if you're a kid running around in the backyard playing, there's going to be a little bit of noise. And so she went outside and called out for Anna, but there was no response. In fact, there was no sight of her anywhere. Obviously worried, her mother called out to the other adults who were in the house, and they all began looking around the property, desperately trying to find Anna. And after calling for her and really not making much progress after 40 minutes of searching, at 3 p.m., they called the San Mateo Sheriff's Office, who immediately sent police to help with the search. The authorities sounded a siren in the neighborhood with the hopes of attracting Anna by the noise, but sadly, Anna was nowhere to be found. The investigation into Anna's disappearance began with searching a creek called Purisima Creek, and this actually ran through the family's property. The creek had been in a flooding state in January 1973. A helicopter crew and divers were called, and the divers began searching this creek. while the family and the deputies continued to search the grounds and the creek. In the following days, friends and neighbors, explorer scouts, and even professional fishermen continued to search with the family. However, despite extensively searching the creek and surrounding areas by both land and sky for 4 days, there was no evidence that supported Anna just wandering off or possibly drowning. And still to this day, no remains, not a bit of clothing, not even one of those oversized rubber boots that she was wearing, have ever been recovered. So it is unlikely that Anna simply wandered by the creek and was somehow a victim of the elements. By now, we would have found some sort of evidence, whether it be clothing or her remains. A geologist issued a report on silting and tide patterns, showing that it was next to impossible that her body was in the creek, because it would have been recovered by this point. A friend of Anna's family reported seeing two men that day, one who was much younger than the other, and they were driving a white truck. And they saw this truck not long before Anna vanished. However, this lead really didn't go anywhere, and the two men have never come forward or been identified by anyone in this area. Authorities are still unclear if they were even involved in Anna's disappearance or they just happened to be driving by that day. So now we're going to look into Anna's biological father, George Waters, because after they had done the search, the ground search, and then also searching the creek, and there really didn't seem to be any evidence at all in this case, they started to speculate whether or not George Waters was involved in her disappearance. And while looking into George, the authorities unearthed some disturbing information. Many abductions are done by family members, and so looking into Anna's biological father definitely makes sense. George Waters was a physician and was practicing in San Francisco, while Anna and her mother resided in San Mateo County with the two half-siblings and her stepfather. And I looked it up, and the driving distance between San Francisco and San Mateo County is about a 50-minute drive. George Waters was questioned and investigated regarding his daughter's disappearance, but nothing was found connecting him to the case. That being said, George's history definitely has some red flags, and so let's dive into the theories and discuss what may have happened to Anna. And as always, before discussing the theories, I want to stress that these are theories and everyone is innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent. The first theory is that Anna's biological father, George Waters, is somehow responsible for her abduction. Following Anna's birth, George began behaving erratically and was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, I want to say that a mental health diagnosis shouldn't be stigmatized, but it is important to note that he did have this diagnosis because it could explain some of George's behaviors. It is also important to note that his family refused to have him committed to a mental hospital because this would have caused him to lose his license and he wouldn't have been able to practice medicine. Now, this is all troubling information, but not necessarily an indicator that George could have abducted or even killed his daughter. However, sometime in 1967, the year Anna was born, while treating a woman who was dying of cancer, George Waters met an older man named George Brody. Since both of these men are named George, I'm going to refer to them as Waters and Brody, just to keep everything straight. After meeting Brody, Waters' already unstable mental state seemed to worsen, and Anna's family believed that Brody was a manipulative man who exercised a cult of personality over Anna's father, who was, dealing with, a schizophrenia diagnosis, and it wasn't being treated. So he was a very, very vulnerable person at this time. And ultimately, it led to the divorce between Anna's biological parents. When Anna's mother got a divorce from George Waters, Waters moved into a cheap hotel in San Francisco with Brody after the divorce, and he supported Brody financially. Waters reportedly did not make any decisions without consulting Brody first. So, like I said, this Brody guy, who we will get more into later on, he definitely had some sort of hold over Waters. Following Anna's disappearance, George Waters never contacted his ex-wife to offer any sort of sympathy or even to ask for updates about the case. His only known reaction to his daughter's abduction was asking his attorney if this meant that he could discontinue his child support payments. And so, obviously, this doesn't make George Waters look very good, but it doesn't necessarily mean he was involved. It's simply suspicious and pretty cold behavior. Joe Ford, Anna's stepfather, spent time watching Waters and Brody in the years following Anna's disappearance. And apparently he mailed a letter accusing Waters of having something to do with Anna's disappearance and listened through a hotel wall to the reaction of them opening the letter. And apparently George Waters said, "I'm glad the tot is dead." However, there is really no way to prove that this happened, so you sort of have to take it with a grain of salt. That brings us to the other person of interest in this case, and that is this mysterious George Brody character. And I say character because Anna's family actually doesn't believe that this is his real name, and it's actually just an alias. And the creepy element to George Brody isn't just his weird hold over George Waters, but also the fact that he was way too interested in Anna. He believed that Anna was the reincarnation of a woman he had once lived with, and he made Anna's mother legally change her daughter's name, adding the word Efi or Ifi. I'm not exactly sure on the pronunciation, but basically, he made Anna's mother change her original middle name, which was Christian, to this other name. And this word apparently has no meaning. And basically, George Brody wanted the letters added to Anna's name so that her name would numerologically add up to his own name, which is just so incredibly weird. And the whole situation with Brody is just bizarre. And his manipulative nature could somehow connect to Anna's disappearance. While Anna's mother doesn't believe that her ex-husband, George Waters, had the wherewithal to actually plan and execute an abduction or a murder, and we're really not sure whether or not George Brody actually had something to do with this disappearance, like he was the mastermind behind the plan and like somehow convinced George Waters to go through with this abduction or possibly murder, we're not sure. Or if George Brody himself abducted and or murdered Anna. George Brody died of cancer in December 1981, and his death certificate showed no birth date, no known relatives, and no social security number. So nobody actually knows who this person is. And there is a lot of just mystery shrouding this case due to George Brody and the lack of information on who he actually is. Approximately 2 weeks after George Brody died, George Waters committed suicide by drinking poison in his hotel room. So sadly, both persons of interest in this case died without bringing any more clarity into what happened to Anna. The other theories surrounding this case really center on the possibility of Anna being abducted by a complete stranger and it just being a random kidnapping. And like I stated before, a friend of Anna's family did report seeing two men in a white truck not long before Anna vanished. And the two men have never come forward, they've never been identified. And what's weird about Anna's case is that there has also never been any sort of ransom request. And we also don't know if Anna is alive or if she is deceased. And if a stranger had abducted her for whatever reason, I feel like by now we would have had at least some indication about what happened to her. But it's as if she just vanished off the face of the earth. And typically, with children being abducted, they are usually abducted by people that they know, like family members or family friends, or just people that are familiar to them in some way. And that's not to say that random kidnappings don't happen. Of course they do. However, it is less likely. And I just feel like by now there would have been more evidence that someone either came onto the property and took her, or, you know, if maybe she wandered off a little too far down, where this creek is, maybe she came across someone and they just took the opportunity and abducted her. We really don't know, but I feel like we would have seen maybe more signs of struggle or some sort of evidence that showed a stranger just abducting her. Whereas if her father or George Brody approached her and asked her to, come with them, I feel like most 5-year-olds would be like, oh, okay. But I don't think most 5-year-olds would just go with a random person, It doesn't seem like that was very much in Anna's character to just go off with a random person. But like I said, this is all speculation. Sadly, we really don't have many updates or leads regarding Anna's case that have provided any answers. And in 2005, a family friend decided to take some different approaches to the investigation since there really wasn't much development in the case. And they tried going to the internet to see if, the internet could help at least spread awareness to Anna's case, but also hopefully reach someone that knows something. And so Web Sleuths opened a Spotlight Case forum to get more eyes on Anna and her case. Anna's mother, Michael Benedict, wrote a book called Searching for Anna that came out in 2008. And the book describes Anna's disappearance and the ongoing search efforts. And I'm going to include some pictures of what investigators believe Anna would look like if she is alive today. And it is not very clear right now whether or not the family believes that Anna is alive or dead. At one point in many of the interviews I read, Anna's mother and stepfather believed that she is still alive and maybe doesn't know that she's a missing child and she's just out there living her life. However, many people believe that because of how much time has passed, it is likely that Anna is no longer with us. But whether or not Anna is alive or dead, I really, truly hope that this family gets the answers of what happened to her, because no one deserves to go through life and just not know the fate of their loved one. I mean, it's an incredibly tragic circumstance to have no idea what happened to your child. And if Anna is alive today, I hope that she is reunited with her friends and family. I hope that maybe somehow she is able to see that people have been curious about her case and have been interested in finding out where she is. And if she is just out there having no idea that she was a missing child, maybe coming across a video like this or a news article, anything could remind her of who she was. And if you have any information regarding Anna and her case, please contact San Mateo County Sheriff's Office at 415 364 1811. And I will put all this information as well as my sources that I got the case information from. I'll put all this in the description box of the podcast and on my YouTube channel. But with all that being said, I want to say thank you for listening to this case, and I truly hope the best for Anna if she is still alive, and I hope for answers for her family and loved ones and the community that she was a part of. It would be just so great to be able to have some closure to this cold case. Thank you so much for joining me. It's goodbye for now, but I hope to haunt you again soon.